Chapter 2 of Theology of Culture, the two types of philosophy of religion. As we may have already picked up last time, the first mini lecture, Tillich is fond of using a lot of polarities or poles. Poles are opposites like the North Pole and the South Pole of our planet Earth. So we saw kind of the two poles last time of atheists versus some Christian theologians. Today we're going to see some other poles, especially an ontological approach versus a cosmological approach. And throughout the semester, as we read Tillich, as I share these many lectures about Tillich's theology of culture, we're going to have a lot of different poles or polarities to try to negotiate. Now let me talk about the first approach, the so-called ontological approach. Again, just like last mini lecture, I'll be quoting from the very opening paragraph of the chapter. In this ontological approach, man discovers himself when he discovers God. We humans discover ourselves when we encounter God. We discover something that is identical with oneself, although it transcends you infinitely. Something from which one is estranged, but from which one never has been and never can be separated. Okay, let's try to unpack this so-called ontological approach. As that quote tells us, there is some immediate connection between us, between each human being and God, according to Tillich. I'll say more about that as we go along. Ontological comes from one of the arguments for God, for the existence of God, and we won't get into that, but ontos is the Greek word for being or nature. And an ontological approach is kind of saying it's in the very nature of being that we have this connection with being, in a capital B, being itself, all being. Tillich connects this so-called ontological approach, this approach that starts with an immediate connection with God, to especially to St. Augustine, or Augustine, in Christian history. Now, St. Augustine was influenced by the great ancient Greek philosopher Plato. You see, Plato believed in ideas, or ideals, or forms. What do I mean by that? Well, according to Plato, in this kind of heaven, this heaven of ideas, there is the idea of beauty, there is the idea of goodness, there is the idea of humanity, and also, for example, the idea of chairness. And Plato really said that the idea of chairness is really more than a particular chair, a physical chair, because when you get a particular physical chair, it's always somewhat imperfect. It never quite lives up to the ideal, the idea, the form of chairness. What did Augustine do with that? Well, he said, in order for us human beings, and this separates us from other animals, in order for us human beings to understand any idea, God has to directly enlighten our minds. So in order to even understand the idea of chairness, I need that immediate connection with God, that God is illuminating my brain or my mind so I can understand an idea. Otherwise, if it wasn't for God illuminating my mind, I wouldn't recognize this as a chair. It would just be, certain physical atoms perhaps, but this amalgamation of physical entities that had no meaning, no real meaning for me. Now, Tillich doesn't exactly buy all of this Platonic thinking of Augustine, but he does like Augustine's idea that there is always this immediate connection between you and God, between myself and God. Immediate, it would be opposed to media or mediation, like in order to understand something I use language, or in order to see something I use my eyes. I don't have exactly an immediate connection to those things because I see them through my eyes, I see them through language. I know you and what you're feeling by seeing your face, hearing your words, but I don't immediately know your mind or your feelings in the way, say, that I know my own thoughts or feelings with a kind of immediacy. Okay. Another way to talk about this immediate connection is to refer to the mystical. Mysticism in religious studies refers to a type of religious experience, a direct experience of God. In the case of mysticism, an experience that emphasizes the oneness, the unity between myself and the divine, between yourself and the divine. In fact, there's indeed an identity. Let me read another little passage, and we'll unpack this a little bit more as we go along, but I'll just throw it out there for now. On the bottom of page 22, man is immediately aware of something unconditional, ultimate, which is the prius of the separation and interaction of subject and object. It kind of comes before subject and object. We'll talk about that in a bit. But we have this immediate awareness of that which kind of comes before everything, kind of creates everything else. And that's mysticism. And for Tillich and Augustine, that's really what faith is all about. Faith is this immediate connection we have with God, with the divine. Now, one of the things that Tillich especially likes about this so-called ontological approach is that it allows religion and culture to be together, because everything of culture, all the things words and ideas that I understand, I only understand them because there is this divine connection that makes some sense, that allows things to make some sense, to have some meaning for me. Okay, hopefully you're with me on understanding something about this ontological approach, as Tillich labels it. So this is the good approach. In a second, we'll talk about the bad approach, the cosmological approach. And this cosmological approach came on the scene in the 1200s. So this happened a long time ago, but according to Tillich, this bad turn of Western culture and religion is something that continues to have negative effects to this day. So let me read, just like I read from the first paragraph about the ontological approach. Let me now share this quick summary of the cosmological approach. In the second way, or the cosmological approach, man meets a stranger when he meets God. The meeting is accidental. Essentially, they do not belong to each other. There is no certainty about the stranger man has met. Here, there's a kind of certainty because you have that immediate connection. But now, God may disappear, and only probable statements can be made about God's nature, as Tillich continues in that opening paragraph. Now, he associates the cosmological approach, especially with the great St. Thomas Aquinas. So we have two great saints of the Catholic Christian tradition, Augustine and Aquinas. But Aquinas, his approach is one that, again, that Tillich dislikes. St. Thomas came up with a cosmological argument that basically went like this. Well, if you look out in the world, if you look out at this desk or that chair, in fact, if we look at the whole universe, outer space and everything, everything depends on everything else. It comes into existence, it goes out of existence, it may or may not have existed at all. It depends on something else, it's contingent. Because everything in this universe is contingent and dependent and not necessary, what we need behind it all is a necessary being. Therefore, we have proven God through reason. And Tillich's using the word cosmological in a more general way. As we look at the universe, the cosmos, the orderly world, we use our reason and we kind of figure out that God exists by what we think God has done in the world. We know God by God's effects, by what God causes to happen in the world, but we don't know God immediately, and that's the problem. So we use philosophical reason, which is basically a product of culture, to know things about God. Now, Tillich is a little unfair to St. Thomas because he talks about the knowledge of God that comes from philosophy as being very inferior. And that's not quite fair to St. Thomas because he believes that a good philosopher can be pretty darn certain about a lot of things about God, in fact. Not only that God exists, but that God is one. There is only one God, monotheism. And that God knows all things and causes all things and so on. So St. Thomas believes that at least the good philosopher can know many things about God through philosophy, through reason. And that's good. Of course, for St. Thomas, he concedes that many of us don't have the time or the intellect to be philosophers, and sometimes our philosophy can go wrong and can lead to pride if we are too confident in what a great philosopher one might be. So there is a problem with reason. And then after St. Thomas, theologians later said, wait a minute, I don't think that these proofs, these philosophical proofs for God really work. And today, generally, we kind of agree with the critics, most folks in our modern world agree with the critics of St. Thomas, that you can't really prove God or religion through philosophical or scientific or mathematical kind of reasoning. Now, for those who weren't philosophers, and if reason ever failed, St. Thomas did have a backup. And that was his understanding of faith. But it wasn't faith in the sense of this immediate connection with God, but faith in the authority of the teaching of the church, faith in the hierarchy of the church and its teachings. So we kind of have a separation here of culture and religion insofar as religion can be approached philosophically on the one side, and religion as faith in Jesus Christ, in the Bible that comes through the church. And our faith is in the authority of the church, which has given us the Bible and has given us the tradition and its teachings. So for Tillich, there is this initial separation between God and humanity. That's a real problem. And here we need to say a little bit more about subject and object. What do we mean by an object? Well, an object is a thing that we can analyze, we can think about. If it's a physical thing, I can grab onto it like this chair. If it's a more intellectual object or thing, I can think about it, the idea of chairness. Or I can think about myself a few minutes back, how well did I present that idea of mysticism? I can turn myself into an object, a thing that I think about. But an object is out there, and we can kind of analyze it and think about it in some separation from ourselves right now. Okay, hopefully you're with me on what an object means, or what it means to be objective, that we can kind of point to something and say, yeah, I can feel this chair, I can see this chair, you can see this chair, therefore it must exist. That's objective. Okay, what about subject and subjective? Well, a subject is a person or an animal who experiences, who is the subject of experience, who is conscious in some sense, who feels, who thinks in some way at some level. And if something is just within myself as a subject, just say in my mind, then we might say that it's totally subjective. We could even take it into taste, like, I like chocolate ice cream, but someone else likes vanilla. It's kind of subjective which ice cream is your favorite type of ice cream. Or maybe whether that picture is beautiful or ugly is subjective, or at least more subjective than whether this chair exists. So in a sense, for us, subject and object always are experienced together. We're subjects who are experiencing objects, but we're not the same as the thing we're experiencing, the object we're experiencing. It's not the same as us. And other people are subjects in their own right, but I can't experience them as they experience themselves. I can't get in their own flesh and know directly, immediately, what they are thinking and feeling. But what about God? Well, actually, the traditional Western monotheisms would say that God has this immediate connection. Isn't that your understanding of God, whether you believe in God or not? God immediately knows what you're thinking and feeling. You don't have to, God doesn't have to figure it out from how your face looks or from what you say. God knows it immediately because there is no separation between you and God, at least from God's side. And that takes us back to the other side. For St. Thomas, according to Tillich, God becomes an object who's separated from us, and we need to figure out God by using our sense experience and seeing, hearing, and then thinking about the world, and then we can maybe come, God probably exists. And Tillich says, no, that's a problem. That separates us from God, from the depth dimension, that separates religion and culture. No, we need this immediate experience of God that is beyond subject and object. This point of identity between God and myself. Now, it's not that everything about myself is God or divine, like, my physique is divine, it's absolutely divine. No, but if we agree with Tillich, or if at least we understand him, he's saying that there is some identity, some point of identity, an immediate connection between each of us and God that's beyond this separation of subject and object. Sometimes he refers to it as the cleavage between subject and object. No, I'm not talking about that kind of cleavage, okay? No, I'm talking about our usual experience. There's always some separation between subject and object, but not in terms of this immediate connection that each of us has with God. Okay, we're going to take a break here, and I'm going to erase the board.